Take Myne's passion for books and learning. Take her precociousness, her wild imagination, her can-do attitude, her unconventional thinking, and mischievous energy. Add fiery red hair and that flair for drama. Set it in idyllic late 1800s Prince Edward Island instead of medieval-esque Airfest. And there you have it. You have Anne Shirley. Okay, so maybe they're not exactly the same, yet there's an undeniable kinship between Myne and Anne that is absolutely undeniable, and which we'll explore as the series unfolds. And if you haven't already given this series a chance yet, I highly urge you to do so. Hello, I'm the Chattering Magpie, and today we're diving into the latest anime adaptation of Anne of Green Gables. Life is not easy for Anne Shirley, an 11-year-old orphan with a vast imagination and a short temper. In a twist of fate, she gets taken into the Cuthbert house in Avonlea. The elderly occupants, Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, were however looking for a young boy to help around the farm, but they're in for quite a big shock when they realize that the orphan they receive is a girl. Now, when news of this adaptation broke a few months ago, reactions from anime fans were mixed. After all, Lucy Maud Montgomery's classic book had already been adapted into the beloved 1979 series Akage no An, directed by the legendary Isao Takahata of Studio Ghibli fame. So, understandably, some fans were anxious, even calling the new adaptation unnecessary. I, however, as a lifelong fan of Ella Montgomery's work, will devour just about anything based on her books, so I was beyond stoked. And I was also very excited to see how this adaptation would capture Anne's spirit. Let's explore how this new adaptation takes on the challenge of bringing to life a timeless classic for a new generation of anime fans. Episode 1 is titled It's Such an Interesting World, and it opens with a conversation between Anne and a woman named Mrs. Spencer. Anne has just left the orphanage, and Mrs. Spencer reassures her that she'll be taken in by the Cuthberts, a brother and sister who live in a place called Green Gables that is surrounded by trees. The mention of trees makes Anne light up with excitement, though she quickly reins herself in, embarrassed when Mrs. Spencer seems startled by her enthusiasm. Still, Anne can't help but daydream about her future home, which she's heard is a very, very beautiful place. Except, well, the Cuthberts were expecting a boy, not a little girl. So when Matthew Cuthbert arrives at the train station and finds a girl waiting for him, who on top of that is a bundle of energy and seems to talk non-stop, he's completely overwhelmed. So, gentle soul that he is, he decides to just take her in, because what else is he gonna do? Leave her in the station? I don't think so. Meanwhile, back at Green Gables, we meet the other Cuthbert sibling, Marilla. Her famously nosy neighbor, Rachel Lynde, has come to visit, and Marilla explains that she and Matthew have decided to adopt an orphan boy to help out on the farm, since Matthew is getting older. Rachel, shocked, warns her against it, telling her about an orphan girl who she once heard poisoned an entire family. Marilla, however, brushes it off, confidently assuring Rachel that everything will be fine. After all, they're not getting a girl, they're getting a boy. Or so she thinks. Meanwhile, as Matthew drives Anne home, we start to learn more about the kind of girl she is. She's inquisitive, thoughtful, and absolutely enchanted by the world around her. At one point, Anne asks if she's talking too much. Matthew replies that he doesn't mind. Aw, I just love it when an introvert finds their extrovert pal. Myne beams and says that she's sure the two of them are going to get along just fine. Anne is a girl who feels and expresses her emotions very strongly. One moment she's dramatically lamenting her red hair, and the next she's overcome with joy and awe at the beauty around her, especially as they pass through the tree-lined avenue that is bursting with apple blossoms. We really see just how deeply Anne feels and expresses her emotions when they arrive at Green Gables, only for her to find out that the Cuthberts were expecting a boy, not a girl, and that Matthew just brought her home because he couldn't just leave her in the station. Upon realizing that she might be sent back, Anne bursts into uncontrollable sobs, leaving both Cuthberts stunned. It's a pretty dire situation, but in true Anne fashion, her flair for the dramatic ends up softening the moment. When Marilla asks her name, Anne pleads to be called Cordelia because she finds her real name is unbearably dull and plain. Marilla refuses, of course, so Anne asks that at least that they call her Anne with an E. It's a small detail, but it matters a great deal to her. After a tearful Anne goes to bed, the Cuthberts sit down to discuss what to do about her. Marilla is firm. Anne has to go back. They asked for a boy to help with the farm, and a girl simply won't do. But Matthew, quiet and gentle as ever, disagrees. When Marilla asks what possible use they could have for a girl, Matthew's kind and beautiful heart shines through as he replies, "None, but maybe we might be some good to her." It's a simple line, but it really does say everything about the kind of person that he is. He even suggests that Anne might be good company for Marilla, though Marilla of course brushes it off, insisting that she doesn't need company. She's perfectly fine on her own, and she's definitely not keeping the girl. Sure, Marilla, sure. Matthew basically says as much before heading off to bed. And so do we, because even if Anne doesn't know it yet, it's already clear. Just as she needs the Cuthberts desperately need an Anne in their lives. The next morning, Anne is up and at 'em, full of boundless energy, chattering away at breakfast, much to Matthew's delight and Marilla's consternation. Anne helps tidy up afterward, showing that she's perfectly capable of housework. But when given the chance to play outside, she quietly sits down instead. You see, she doesn't want to grow more attached to Green Gables, knowing that she'll soon have to leave it. As Marilla reflects on Anne's words, she can't help but admit to herself that the girl is, well, she's pretty interesting. In fact, she even catches herself wondering what other strange, unexpected things Anne might say next. Anne eventually leaves with Marilla to go settle the mix-up, offering Matthew a small brave smile as they head out. And the sight of Matthew, standing at the gate, silently watching them go, is quietly heartbreaking. During the drive, Marilla asks Anne about her story, and Anne, who is usually so dramatic and expressive, becomes noticeably subdued. She speaks plainly without her usual flair and tells her that she's 11, that she was born in Nova Scotia, that she knows very little about her parents, just their names, and that they died of a fever shortly after she was born. However, though she doesn't know very much about them, that doesn't keep her from fantasizing about having been deeply loved by them. The subtitles aren't very clear during this part, and they skip over some important details, but Anne's story, even in its fragments, paints a heartbreaking picture. After being orphaned as a baby, she was first taken in by Mrs. Thomas, the cleaning lady, who had a drunk for a husband. Then she was passed on to Mrs. Hammond, who had 8 children, and Anne was expected to raise them. She was treated more like a servant than a child. When Mr. Hammond died, Mrs. Hammond broke up housekeeping. That means she sold the house, split up her kids among the relatives, and then went off to the States. Except that none of the relatives wanted to take in Anne, so she went into the orphanage, a place that actually didn't even want her either because they were already overcrowded. She stayed there for 4 months. Marilla listens silently, and though she doesn't say much, we can see her resolve beginning to crack. She asks if those people were good to her, and Anne replies, "I'm sure that they meant to be kind and good to me," and that of course speaks volumes of how love-starved she is, but also about the kind of girl she is. Not whining, not complaining, not trash-talking those people that brought her up, something that Marilla does pick up on. The crack in Marilla's resolve becomes a full break when another neighbor, Mrs. Blewett, offers to take Anne in if the Cuthberts won't. Mrs. Blewett immediately gives off bad vibes. While I was watching this on the server with other bookworms who had never yet read the books or watched any of the adaptations, they immediately felt the dread and they immediately disliked the woman before she even said a word, before we even got a good look at her face. So, good job, show. She coldly sizes Anne up as if she were livestock, remarking that while she's small and skinny, she'll do, so long as she earns her keep and obeys. Anne is trembling in fear, clearly terrified of ending up in yet another joyless, loveless home. Mrs. Spencer and Mrs. Blewett seem satisfied with the arrangement, but Marilla is not having it. She shuts the whole thing down calmly, but firmly, saying that she and Matthew were only considering sending Anne back. No decision has been made. Hearing these words, Anne's face lights up with hope. Matthew is just as pleased with the outcome, and as the two of them talk it over, Marilla admits that she never imagined herself raising a child, let alone a girl. But if this is how things have turned out, she's willing to do so. Meanwhile, upstairs in her room, Anne kneels by the window in prayer as cherry blossoms drift in on the breeze. She prays in typical Anne fashion to, first of all, someday be beautiful, but most importantly, she asks God to be allowed to stay at Green Gables. It's quiet, it's tender, and beautifully earnest. It really is a perfect ending to the beginning of Anne's new chapter. Now, before diving in, I want to say this. Every adaptation has its own strengths, and while it might be tempting to compare this version to others, specifically the 1979 version, that wouldn't be entirely fair. That version was a product of its time. It was a whopping 50 episodes long and was made with the technology, sensibilities, and pacing of a totally different era. Plus, it only covered the first book. If we're going to compare, then I guess a better comparison might be the classic Megan Follows live-action series, which, like this version, covers more of the books. Anne of Green Gables has been around since 1908, and with so many TV and film adaptations already out there, the best way to approach any new take is with fresh eyes. So I'm going to set aside all other comparisons to all other adaptations altogether. The only standard I'll be using here is the original source material, which is Ellen Montgomery's novel. And if you're unfamiliar with the story, I highly recommend that you pick up the books. It's a delightful classic. As for this adaptation, I've watched it and I found it utterly charming. It promises to be a lovely feel-good watch for this season, which, Lord knows we need some of that. Now, I'm not at all acquainted with the studio behind this adaptation, but they did do a beautiful job with it. Reading through viewers' comments and reviews, it was clear that the biggest gripe people had with this adaptation was the CGI horse. Personally, I've seen some terrible CGI horrors in the past, but as far as they go, this one was actually pretty decently done. It wasn't perfect, but I don't think it detracted from the overall experience. They used a vibrant color palette that modernized the story while still keeping true to the pastoral vibe of the classic book, which was set in the 1800s. The sky and the ocean were drawn in soft pastels, almost like crayons, and the whole aesthetic reminded me so vividly of my favorite childhood books. It added to the nostalgic feel of the story while making it feel fresh and alive. Anne of Green Gables is based on a very real place, Cavendish in Prince Edward Island, Canada. The adaptation did a fantastic job bringing those familiar sights and landmarks around the island to life. The lush greenery of the island contrasts so beautifully with the hard, lifeless city that Anne came from. No wonder she was in raptures over her new home. First off, I really appreciate how the English subtitles used actual passages from the book for dialogue. Huge kudos to the translation team for that. Also, this one episode covers a whopping 7 chapters from the book, which does sound like a lot. However, Ellen Montgomery had a unique gift for painting vivid pictures of the beautiful landscapes and intricately describing her characters and all of their quirky traits. Plus, Anne does tend to prattle on quite a bit, so all things considered, they didn't really leave anything too important on the cutting room floor. Some scenes were abbreviated, others were cut out entirely, just so they could fit the episode's pacing. For example, we get all of Chapter 1 axed out, except for a brief scene with Mrs. Rachel going over to visit Marilla. And that's okay. While that chapter introduces us to the neighborhood and an outsider's perspective on the Cuthbert's reclusive tendencies, as well as sets the tone for the book, It's not essential to the core of Anne's story. The chapter's charm actually lies in its wholesome sweetness and how it gently pokes fun at the town's busybodies, something that the adaptation will capture, I'm sure, in spirit, even if it skips over these details. Another notable omission is Anne's morning in Green Gables. After she gets out of bed to stare out in rapture at the world outside, we get a long passage describing the beauty of the world as she sees it. But then, we also get a little exchange with Marilla, who goes upstairs and rouses her from her windowside daydreams, and they have another interesting little exchange. And then there's chapter 7, which I highly recommend reading. It's absolutely hilarious as Anne tries to learn how to pray for the very first time. You see, she's never been taught how to pray, and when she learns this, Marilla is absolutely shocked. While the show does give a subtle nod to this scene when Anne ends her prayer with "yours respectfully" instead of the traditional "Amen," it's really just the tip of the iceberg. The full exchange in the book is priceless. It perfectly highlights Anne's quirky, unorthodox approach to everything and shows how Marilla begins to realize that she'll need to be more gentle, more patient, and understanding with Anne, who has never truly experienced love or kindness from the world before. On the topic of Anne and prayer, I also noticed that many of the Christian overtones or themes have been toned down or removed in this adaptation. While the original novel is deeply rooted in religious values of its time, the show seems to take a more subtle approach to these themes, which is understandable since Japan has, for the most part, a very secular culture. I started this episode by drawing a loose comparison between Myne and Anne. Though they come from vastly different worlds, they still share a certain gremlin energy. They're chaotic, curious, and endearingly disruptive to their guardians' once orderly lives. While it might seem a bit of a stretch, I still can't help but notice a familiar dynamic at play here. In my very first Ascendance of a Bookworm video, I focused heavily on Ferdinand as a foil to Myne. Just as Myne's relationship with Ferdinand forms the backbone of Bookworm, with each character challenging and ultimately improving the other, Anne establishes two pivotal relationships at Green Gables. With Matthew, there's an immediate connection, a recognition of kindred spirits. But with Marilla, we see something more complex and potentially transformative. Marilla's practical, no-nonsense demeanor makes her resistant to Anne's flights of fancy, much like Ferdinand's initial reaction to Myne. The true beauty of Anne of Green Gables lies in watching how this strange, passionate girl doesn't just enter into Marilla's life, but slowly transforms it, helping her rediscover long-buried dreams and emotions. While it's still early in the series, Marilla's character development does promise to be among the most compelling aspects of the story, a testament to how profound changes often come from unexpected encounters. I do want to point out, though, that if you want to get a bit more of the character nuance, you have to go back to the original source material. The way that Ella Montgomery paints Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert is so masterful. Take, for example, how Marilla's character isn't established through dialogue, but through her surroundings. Mrs. Rachel stepped out of the lane into the backyard of Green Gables. Very green and neat and precise was that yard. Not a stray stick nor stone was to be seen, for Mrs. Rachel would have seen it if there had been. Privately, she was of the opinion that Marilla Cuthbert swept that yard over as often as she swept her house. One could have eaten a meal of the ground without overbrimming the proverbial speck of dirt. The kitchen at Green Gables was a cheerful apartment, or would have been cheerful if it had not been so painfully clean as to give it something of the appearance of an unused parlor. Its windows looked east and west. Through the west one, looking out at the backyard, came a flood of yellow June sunlight. But the east one, whence you got a glimpse of the bloom-white cherry trees in the left orchard, and nodding slender birches down in the hollow by the brook, was screened over by a tangle of vines. Here sat Marilla Cuthbert, when she sat at all, always slightly distrustful of sunshine, which seemed to her too dancing and irresponsible a thing for a world which was meant to be taken seriously. And here she sat now, knitting, and the table behind her was laid for supper. Strange that Marilla, who keeps everything neat and tidy, should have let the east-facing window of her kitchen, eastward orientation representing light, life, new beginnings, and hope, be greened over by a tangle of vines, obscuring the view of the beautiful blossoms and the garden and the wild brook outside her window. The anime, however, presents a somewhat softer version of her character compared to Montgomery's original creation. The Marilla we see in this first episode does maintain her practicality, and she does have initial resistance to keeping Myne. But I kind of feel that there is a subtle warmth and empathy that emerges more quickly than in the source material. Though that's not to say that Marilla was entirely heartless in the book. The book describes her thusly during the scene with Mrs. Blewett. Marilla looked at Anne and softened at the sight of the child's pale face with its look of mute misery. The misery of a helpless little creature who finds herself once more caught in the trap from which it had escaped. Marilla felt an uncomfortable conviction that if she denied the appeal of that look, it would haunt her to her dying day. Moreover, she did not fancy Mrs. Blewett. To hand a sensitive, high-strung child over to such a woman— no, she could not take the responsibility of doing that. As to the adaptation, I loved so much how Marilla, when she saw Anne tremble as Mrs. Blewett was talking to her, how Marilla exhibited the same symptoms of anxiety, the same wide eyes, the same trembling of the fisted hands that Anne showed. This Marilla is very good at heart. She is empathetic to a surprising degree. And were she to let her guard down a little, she might be at risk of being called a kindred spirit by Anne. As it is, it's clear that beneath her tough exterior, there's a lot of warmth and understanding waiting to shine through. This softening of Marilla's character can probably be attributed to pacing constraints. The anime needs to establish the emotional connection between these characters quickly and efficiently, whereas the novel has the luxury of gradually revealing Marilla's thawing attitude through internal monologue and small, subtle moments across many chapters. I am not complaining, though. This slight character adjustment is absolutely welcome. There is something genuinely refreshing about seeing a softer world depicted in media today. While purists might prefer absolute fidelity to Montgomery's characterization, there's emotional value in witnessing Marilla yield a bit sooner to Anne's irrepressible spirit. The adaptation strikes a thoughtful balance. Marilla remains the practical, no-nonsense foil to Anne's wild imagination, but her emotional journey is gently and slightly accelerated to suit a more modern audience. This approach also ensures that Anne isn't subjected to too much emotional rebuffing before finding acceptance, making for a more immediately satisfying viewing experience while preserving the core relationship dynamic. As to Matthew, oh Matthew, what a beautiful and sensitive soul he is. Take this passage from the book. Matthew stirred uneasily. He felt glad that it would be Marilla and not he who would have to tell this waif of the world that the home she longed for was not to be hers after all. By the time they arrived at the house, Matthew was shrinking from the approaching revelation with an energy he did not understand. It was not of Marilla or himself that he was thinking, or of the trouble this mistake was probably going to make for them, but of the child's disappointment. When he thought of that rapt light being quenched in her eyes, he had an uncomfortable feeling that he was going to assist at murdering something, much like the same feeling that came over him when he had to kill a lamb, or a calf, or any other innocent little creature. Notwithstanding him leaving it to his sister to do the difficult job of disillusioning the child because he can't bring himself to do it, I still think he made up for it by his wanting to keep Anne and advocating for her even though he so rarely asks for anything himself. He also knows his sister and thinks that maybe he's not the only one that has a need for someone. But he's still wise enough not to push that onto Marilla, presenting it to her as an opportunity to do some good to another person because she'd likely accept that far more readily than accepting the fact that she could be benefited personally by the joy and cheer a little girl like Anne could bring to her own cheerless life. I love this Matthew, but I would have liked to see him be depicted a little bit more faithfully. The book says that he was an odd-looking personage with an ungainly figure and long iron gray hair that touched his stooping shoulders, and he had a full, soft brown beard, which he had worn ever since he was 20. While watching, sometimes it was a little hard to believe that he was an aged gentleman in need of a boy to help him around the farm. He actually looked like a man still in his prime. That said, I did like his quiet delivery of his lines and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. And yes, while I do wish that they had more time to show just how painfully, and I do mean painfully, shy and reserved Matthew is, I love how they gave us his perspective when he met Anne. The fisheye lens effect was used so well here, perfectly capturing how overwhelmed he was by this whirlwind of a little girl, and how from the outside the whole encounter looked hilariously lopsided. A big, quiet man was completely conquered by a little girl. And speaking of Anne, I have to give a special mention to Honoka Inoue's lovely voice acting. While I know she has a much higher pitch range, I'm glad she didn't go for the overly cutesy sound. Given how fast Anne talks, it would have made her sound much more like a chattering chipmunk, and I think that would have been a bit much. Some might have even found it borderline annoying. Anne's design also pays homage to the 1979 classic with her large forehead and unruly microbangs, which I really appreciated. As for her character, she carries a quintessential anime protagonist energy, which is utterly charming. Her infectious enthusiasm, her vivid imagination, and her ever-changing moods remind me of Myne's boisterous spirit as she chases after her own goals. These qualities, along with her quirky personality, truly drive the show. It's not to say that this Anne is all high spirits. You know, she cries, she feels sad, and her emotions do turn on a dime. However, I do wish that there had been a little bit more room to breathe in the scene where she's waiting at the train station for the Cuthberts to pick her up. Anne's prolonged silences, while uncanny, are an important part of her character in the book. It's like taking Hinata from Haikyuu and removing all those moments when he just stares in that signature way of his. Anne's silences are just as crucial to her character as her endless chatter. They reveal a lot about her inner world, her anxieties, her deep thinking, and the moments when her overwhelming emotions can't quite find the words. It's this balance of silence and speech that makes her such a complex and relatable character. Yet, despite the time constraints and slight changes to the portrayals of Matthew and Marilla, there's really nothing to complain about when it comes to Anne. While they can't capture every single one of her long-winded rants, the moments they do include perfectly convey the essence of her character. After watching the first episode, I can confidently say that they've brilliantly captured her spark, her joy for life. They've also done a really good job at introducing the primary cast of characters. This premiere is strong and will likely appeal to fans of gentle, slice-of-life, humorous shows. If you like found family stories and character-driven narratives, this show is for you. If you need something that will not drive your anxiety through the roof, this is also for you. I'm especially excited that they're doing 24 episodes for this adaptation, as it suggests that they will cover not just the first book, but the others in the series as well. Of course, this is just my take on this series, but I'm super interested to know what you thought about this first episode. And if you have already read the books or watched any of the other adaptations, I'd love to hear what you think. And if you like this video and you like to see me cover more of Anne Shirley, please drop a like, comment, engage with this video so I know that there's more people that want more of this kind of content. Also, you can join this channel and become a member, supporting me so that I can continue to do these kinds of videos. And if you do so, you can get all kinds of little perks depending on your level. You can join me over on my Discord server where we will be watching this and discussing the book. Finally, I'll also be doing read-alongs with fellow bookworms, and they're sure to be a lot of fun. Join me on Wednesdays and Fridays on the channel. Thank you all for watching, and thank you to all my supporters. Until next time, bookworms, bye bye!